All right, so now that we're recording, for those of you that joined late, we quickly looked at everyone's sketches to kind of get an idea of what people are going with their poster. We did the Saul Bass lecture, which is located on the course presentations. So take a look at that for some ideas, some inspiration, or at least some context of design history. Now we're going to do a demo. And this demo is located. Oh man, I think I uploaded the right one. I guess we're going to find out. In demo files, there's one called Magritte masking demo. I better grab this thing and make sure I got the right one. Perfect. This is what we're going to do. So let you guys a minute or two to pull this down. But here's what we're looking at. Here's the final, and I've given you 3 pieces inside of this folder. I'm going to have you guys walk me through how you would create this composite. I called this Magritte. Rene Magritte was I'm just assuming off of the name, he's got to be French, right? French surrealist, and this is a little bit of a homage or tip of the hat, pun intended, to one of his more famous compositions where the apples on the bowler hat type thing. But we're going to use Photoshop to create more of a seamless composite between the apple and the bowler hat. So yeah, once you guys get this thing open, where is my chat pod? There we go. Sweet. I'll turn off the final. That'll be our reference. And we've got 3 layers down here. What needs to happen? How do we go about this? Anybody have what's the stuff that we know? Let's just go ahead and get through that first. How do I need to go about creating an image like this? I'll give you a hint. It involves masking.
I was going to say you probably mask the top of the hat.
Okay.
I see the apple was stretched on the bottom, I guess,
Okay.
or distorted, but to fit that mask. And then, of course, it was masked for, well, I don't know. I was thinking about masking for the background so the sky would show.
Could be. I'll tell you what, let's start here. Let's make it even easier. This is the final. Out of these 3 images, what do you think is sitting all the way underneath everything?
The sky.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the sky is sitting below the apple and the hat. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and take our sky layer and let's move it all the way underneath everything. Now I'm not seeing anything, and that's because it's being obscured by the hat and the apple. So sky's at the bottom. So ostensibly, when we get this thing right, these things should appear on top. Got a few more problems, but first things first, the sky is not quite big enough. What's the command hotkey, or where is it in my tools to make this thing a little bit bigger?
Control T, transform.
Control T. Yep, Control T. So I got the background layer selected. I'm going to hit Control or Command T. There's my transform widget. And I'll just go ahead and make this thing a little bit bigger. Now, some of you might have this feature selected with the move tool where it says show transform controls. And if you do, you don't even need to go into a free transformation. It'll allow you to do it. I usually turn this off because it throws me off a little bit. I'm sometimes moving around a little bit fast, and I can accidentally grab a corner when I don't mean to. So I usually leave this set to off, but that's up to you. I've seen a lot of people use that and it works just fine. Most important thing here is you want the sky to be going full composition, end to end. You don't want any gaps. Now, the next question is, what's on top of what? Is the hat on top of the apple? Is the apple on top of the hat? I'll give you the way that I actually did it is the apple in this case is on top of the hat. I'm not totally sure it would matter, but if you want to do it exactly the way that I did it, go ahead and make sure that the apple is on top of the hat. And let's start with the hat. So the hat looks pretty decent, just a stock image of a bowler hat. I've got a pretty obtrusive white background on the image. I need to get rid of that. What's a good technique to get rid of that white? Several. What we think is
Object selection.
that's what I did. Yep. You could maybe remove background. I'm not exactly sure where remove background would be. I'm not saying it's not there. I just not totally familiar. It'd probably be under select. Is there actually a remove background? I've got to always double check because they add new things in all the time. So if there is a remove background tool, let me know where it's at.
I think it's in the eraser. tool.
Stay away from the eraser. I would encourage you guys not to use the eraser because it's destructive. Here's the problem with the eraser. Well, one, this is a smart object. So if I try to erase it right now, it won't even let me. So I hit E. It's like, no, you can't do that. Then you can rasterize it and erase. But the problem with the eraser is if you go too far and you actually eat into the hat, you're not bringing it back. So for this class, unless there's a really good particular reason, I don't think we ever need to really use the eraser. Let's use masks instead. So someone said the object select. That's actually what I did with the layer selected. I just went to select, subject, or maybe someone said object select. I think that would work just as well, but I did use select subject. Select subject is just going to look for difference in pixels. And since this is a black and white, a black image on a white background, seems to work just fine. And it looks like Candy posted a little screen grab to where the remove background was. I'm assuming it's with the selection tool and it's somewhere. You might have the contextual toolbar out, which is window contextual taskbar right here under remove background. I usually keep that thing off. It's not a bad thing. It's just, it always gets in my way. Whatever I do, that thing follows around and it kind of drives me nuts. Be honest with you guys, since I can't see your screen, I kind of forget about it. At class in the morning, I tell all the kids to turn it off. It's pretty handy. It's got, it's basically like a heads up display of the majority of things that you would want. However, when it constantly like jerks around and like when I'm painting and stuff and it's like moving around, it just bothers me. So I hit the little kebab and I go to hide bar. Yeah, I know you can move it, but unless there's another setting that I don't know, it'll snap back to wherever you're at and just kind of hover there. So if you like to use it, great, awesome. I don't. All right, I do have a selection. Looks pretty good. Now there's one of two things I could do. I could mask it right now. That would work. Or I could just duplicate the layer. Either one would be fine. The reason I'm going to duplicate the layer is because right now it's a smart object and I'll have to take an extra step to rasterize it, which I could do. Why take the extra step? So when you have a selection, you can just hit Command or Control J as in Juliet. And now you should have a hat on a transparent background. So kind of got step one done, and I'll do the very, very similar technique to the green apple. So might as well go ahead and turn that on. Make sure I'm on this layer. And same thing as before, I'm going to go to select. Let's try the other one. Let's go to object select. See how the object selection tool does. If I hover over this for a second, it looks pretty good. Click once. And now I can just hit Control or Command J. And there's my duplicate. So both ways work pretty well. There is a slight haloing on the apple. There's a slight haloing on the hat. This isn't that kind of demo. I don't want to talk about how to light correct these. It's close enough. Is anybody having any problems getting their selections or duplicating things? Kind of done with these for right now. I don't need these anymore. I'll keep them just in case I need to reference them, but these are really the only 3 layers I need to complete this exercise. someone, I don't remember who it was, Carmen or I don't know, whoever was speaking before, I kind of missed the name on this, but someone said that the apple had been warped a little bit.
Yeah, that was me. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's true. This is very close to the right size. Make sure I'm on the right layer. This is pretty close to the right size, but it's not quite perfect. So when doing an operation like this, I find it really useful. Take that top layer, and I'm just going to drop the opacity down a little bit so I can kind of see through it. So I'm down to about 50 something opacity. And I'm lining up the edges, and I can see the left side now looks pretty good. It's the right side it's really too big. So just like before, Command or Control T to transform. And I'm just going to shrink the edge down so both sides really kind of touch the crown of that bowler hat. Looks lined up pretty well, and I can always fuss with it later, but this looks pretty close. Maybe like right about there. Once I'm happy with it, I can accept the transformation by just hitting enter and bring that opacity all the way back up to 100. So if yours looks somewhat close to mine, the last part's pretty easy. Like I said, hint, hint, it's a mask. The way that this has a really nice kind of gentle flow into it, though, is it's a big brush, it's soft edged, and it's low opacity. So let's try that. Well, we know that this layer is going to require a mask, so we'll go ahead and pop a mask on it. First part's done. Next part is going to require a big soft brush. So I'll grab my brush, B for brush. Now my mask is completely clean, meaning that I'm seeing all of the apple right now. Well, I want to mask some of that apple. So I'm going to flip over to black. Remember, the hotkey to toggle foreground background is X. And if you don't have black and white loaded, if you hit D as in Delta, that will restore your default, D for default, and it will go back to white and black, which is really handy for masking. I'll hit X, so I got a black brush loaded. Get my brush back. Now, right now, my brush is about 200 pixels big. The hardness is set to 0. So if I was just to click, hold, and drag, bring the opacity back up to 100, it's like this. So it's not bad, but it's too opaque. So I'll just Control Z or Command Z. Let's try an opacity of maybe 16%. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start painting along the bottom. Here's the thing about the brushes. If you click, hold, and drag, and you paint, 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 and you don't let go, you're only painting with 16% opacity. Every time that you go over something that you've already hit with 16%, it's not going to add to it. That's a different type. That's your flow. So what I would encourage you to do is click, hold, and drag, let go, click, hold, and drag, let go, click, hold, and drag, let go, and just do several sweeps. So I'm going to start here at the bottom, click, hold, and drag, click, hold, and drag, click, hold, and drag. And I can see that 16% is going to take a little while. So maybe I'll bring that opacity up to 20, 25, and I'll just click, hold, and drag. I'm just going to keep painting. And as soon as I start to get kind of closer to the top, I'll start to make like little swooping strokes. Now, the reason I said don't use the eraser is if I go too far with it, and it's really simple to maybe go too far, just flip back to white, paint it back in. So you can really fine tune exactly how this thing needs to look into something like that. Hopefully it's starting to click a little bit why we're doing what we're doing. Masking is without question the way that you will achieve photorealistic composites when you're blending two things together or obscuring certain things. It just gives you the utmost control and versatility as far as what you take out, how much of what you take out, and then the ability to put back in and how much you put back in. That's why we're using masks. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about that Saul Bass type treatment, but I'll pause here for a second. Is anybody having any problems getting this to look the way that mine looks? because I can stop sharing, you share your screen, but if everyone's with it, that's cool, that's great. If we were to do a Saul Bass type treatment in Illustrator, it would be quite easy. You would just type, use the direct select tool, move the anchor points around, and create jagged, uneven, quirky type. Photoshop, you have to take an extra step, but it's really not hard. So I'm going to call this Magritte. I'm going to say that this is a biopic about the artist's life. So I'll get the type tool. Type Magritte. I think I spelled that correctly. I'm going to pick a better font. This would totally work. It's just, it's very thin. It's kind of delicate. So I'm going to pick something a bit thicker. What we got here? Looking for like a slab serif. It's a bit too hard. I don't care what font you pick. That's not what's important here. I'm going to do Rockwell. But in order to do this easier, something that's thicker and a bit more bold, I think is going to be easier on you. There we go. Let's make this a bit bigger. It's at 50 point right now. I'll go up to 150. Ooh, that's too big. Bring that down some. So with Rockwell, about 100 point type fits pretty well. Now the design principle of contrast suggests that white type on a very white background is tough to read. I agree. So I think I'm going to change that color to a dark blue, or maybe even see if there's any. That green works pretty well. Actually, I think the dark blue is where to go. There we go. All right, so I want to add some personality, some irregularities to this type. Trust me when I say if you get the, is it even called? Yeah, the direct select tool, which behaves just like Illustrator, by the way. Same thing, it's designed for anchor points, but I don't have any anchor points. This is not an anchor thing yet. It's super simple to do this, but one caveat, once you do this, it's no longer editable type. So it might be a good idea if you're going to experiment with this to duplicate your layer. That way you'll always have an editable layer if you want to change the font, or if you misspell something, or you want to change the leading or the kerning or whatever, you can do that. Once you turn it into a shape layer, you'll lose that ability, but you'll gain the ability to mess with the anchor points. So let's do it. The layer selected. See, it's selected over here, and I'll go to layer. Missing it? Huh. Looks like it's ghosted out. You. What I was looking for is shape layer, and I am not seeing it. That's so weird. I literally just did this before class started. What am I missing? On the right layer. Hmm. Wow. I just like completely hit a roadblock there. What happened? Well, we might be taking a break sooner than later so I can figure this out. Yeah, that is incredibly strange. Well, to be continued, to say the least. I had no idea. Oh, that's frustrating.
Wait, what happened?
Well, what I did earlier and what I was trying to do just now was I was trying to turn this into a shape layer. And I realized that I must have done something last time that I'm not doing this time. And it's incredibly bad. So
Isn't something like that easier to do in like Adobe Illustrator or something?
it totally is, but I want to show you guys how to do it here too. Oh, okay. Sorry, guys. It's not under layer. That's my fault. So make sure your layer selected. It is going to be a type, convert to shape. I'm glad I figured that out. Man, how frustrating. But this will turn it into a shape layer. But let me double back real quick and say, once you do this, and we're going to do it, you will lose the editability of the type. So if you wanted to change it to Bodini or Helvetica, you're not going to be able to do it. It's going to be as if you pen tooled this whole thing out. So convert to shape. There it is. Now, if you get your direct select tool, which may or may not be under the path select, get your direct select. You should see all the anchor points light up. Let's zoom in a little bit. All right, so this is what's called a rubber band select. I don't know if your Illustrator teacher talks about that, but when you click, hold, and drag to grab multiple anchor points. So I got those two on the left, and I'm going to pull this over to the side a bit. I'll make this one a little bit taller just by selecting that one. Bring this down. And you can see I'm starting to take what is a very recognizable font and distort it in such a way that gives it a little bit more, I don't know if oomph is the right word, but quirkiness. But I do like this technique and I use it sometimes. Try not to overuse it. Got to be a bit careful though. Good fonts are designed with counter space in mind. So when you do this, you could be altering the legibility of the font. So don't push it too far. Have fun with it. It's obviously there to be messed around with. But if you go a little bit too berserk with it, it might be tough to read. But again, that was taking the type layer and then going to type, convert to shape. How did it work? Did everyone's come out okay? This is not going to be something that is going to be in every project. In fact, it might not be in very many projects. It might not be in any projects, but at least you know how to do it if you were tasked with doing it inside of Photoshop. To Jason's point, yeah, I think it would be easier in Illustrator, but if this is the only program I had, or here's what Photoshop does better than Illustrator are effects. So instead of having to jump into Illustrator, get my type the way that I want it to, save it as a smart object, bring it over, have it linked or embedded, and doing that over and over and over again, only to have to put a wave or a warp or a filter or whatever, I can do it right inside of here and say, all right, well, it looks pretty good, but it really needs a, say, drop shadow. And I don't want it to be black. I want it to be white. I want it to be offset some. That's something that you really couldn't do as well inside of Illustrator, especially if the effects get more and more complicated. And it's still editable. So if I want to get that direct select tool and say, all right, well, let's work on the eye now. Let's make the eye a little bit taller. Grab those points. And that drop shadow will react to it because it's just an effect on that layer. Pretty easy. We have two exercises that are due on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Neither one are hard. One deals with type, the other one deals with color effects. So we can do those and then we can take our break. Should probably be around the 8:20 mark. So if you guys want to get to it, let's go ahead and do it. I'll leave this up just in case. So let's see what we got. Now there are links to these tutorials. They're on our Blackboard. So if you prefer following along with the Adobe posts, please do. But this is a cool effect. This is what's called blend if. Essentially what we're trying to do, if you remember, I said a while back, we're going to make like the Star Wars title sequence, you know, like the crawl where things are going back in space. It's really simple to do in Photoshop. We need to make our type a little bit smaller, and then we need to adjust the perspective. And once we get that, we'll kind of line it up with the road, so it's kind of going back in 1-point perspective. But then we're going to do one last feature, what's called blend if. It took me an embarrassingly long time to figure this out. I was doing comic book art and trying to figure out a way to duck out the white pages that I scanned in and just keep the black lines. And I would get on these old forums back in the day and they're like, use blend if, use blend if. And I'm like, what does that even mean? I don't get that. I'll show you what it means. So first things first, we're on the Great Outdoors layer. We're going to enter a transformation. So it's just edit, free transform, or Control or Command T. And all I'm doing now is I'm just shrinking this down to fit a bit better. So that looks good. And I don't even need to apply it. I can stay in this mode. If you've already applied it, that's fine. The next step is going to be the same. But applied or not applied, now you can just go to Edit, Transform, and we're looking for perspective. When you have perspective, you can grab these corner points, scale them up, move this around a little bit, and that looks pretty good. Now keep this in mind. Even though you're in perspective, you can still kind of jump between the free transformation. If you hold the Shift key down and grab, I guess maybe not. No, I guess that's changed. Back in the day, you'd be able to hold the Shift key and it would revert back to just free transformation, but it looks like now you're stuck. So if you need it to be smaller, hit Enter and then Control or Command T. I'll hold the Shift key down and I'll just kind of scooch it down a little bit, or maybe scooch it this way.
Professor Will, does it have to look the same as yours?
Close, not the same. I feel like I could probably use a little bit more perspective, kind of kick it out to the sides a bit more. So I'll go to Edit, Transform, Perspective. That's about where you want your typography to be, give or take. I'm not throwing out hard numbers of like it needs to be -58 and whatever, but make it look like it's sitting on the road. Make it look like it's been painted on the road, and in a believable enough manner that it's skewing along that 1-point perspective. So I'm good with this. I'm going to go ahead and hit Enter. Now, there's a couple things that we're going to do to bring in some, because as far as the perspective goes, this looks right. It's in the right spot. However, it looks real phony. It looks like it's just sitting on top of there. It does not look in any way, shape, or form like it's adhering to the material of the road, the asphalt or concrete or wherever that stuff is. There's two things that we can do to make it much more believable. One is a blend mode. The other is the blend if. So we're going to do both. So first thing on our Great Outdoors layer, our piece of type, change the blend mode to overlay. And that right there really brings in a lot of that grit. So remember, blend modes has to use 2 layers. You'll never see a blend mode work with just 1 layer. So in this case, it's taking that yellow typography, it's looking at the layer below it, and it's looking for value. And it's taking the values, the darks and the lights, and it's making certain parts transparent and certain parts opaque. That's the beauty of the blend modes. Now, not all of them would look like this, and you're free to experiment and be like, well, I'm just curious, what would multiply look like? Different. What does color burn? What does screen? What does X, Y, and Z? Overlay is the one that we want. Overlay is giving us the greatest amount of texture coming through. Now to push this just a little bit further, check this out. Either double click the layer or hit effects. Either way, you want to see your blending options. This is where you would put your drop shadows and your outer glows and stuff like that. But here is blend if. It's over here at the bottom. It's not in any of the styles. It's right here. There are two ways to use blend if. One is the layer itself, meaning the type, which in this case is not what we want to do. The other is what is underneath the layer. That's the one that we want. So if we take a look at this slider here, this is a pretty common ramp that you'll see in certainly Photoshop, but a lot of other programs. Anytime that you're presented with one of these and you're not sure what it does, just grab one of the sliders and click, hold, and drag. Okay, so it's starting to make parts of it disappear. Good. What if I do the other side? Okay, more of it's starting to disappear. So what's happening here is the layer that we're on, the typography, is looking at the pixels of the layer underneath. And on the left-hand side is the dark pixels. The right is the light pixels. If we were to grab the left slider, click, hold, and drag, wherever the darker pixels are, at some point, those will become the basis for transparency. So you can see the darker pixels are kind of closest to the bottom of the composition. And as we move this, those darker pixels are obscuring parts of that type layer. Likewise, the lighter pixels, which would be closer to the horizon line, if we click, hold, and drag and move those, suddenly some of those start to erode away our typography. So that's kind of cool. It's well and good, but it doesn't really help much. And generally speaking, we got lucky with this piece. But if you're doing this for like fire or smoke or something, just grabbing the sliders by themselves don't help very much. But here's the trick. Let's use the black slider, and I'm just going to click, hold, and drag, and I'm going to push it around. I'm at about 50. Not much has happened. In fact, almost nothing has happened. But I don't want such a hard transition. And that's where this trick comes in. I wish I could zoom in, but you're going to have to trust me. Maybe you can see it on your screen. These sliders have a tiny little line down the middle. So these little chevrons, these little triangles, warning marks here, they have a little slice right down the middle. When you see this, that means that they're breakable. And this is how you set threshold. So in order to break a slider like this, you're going to hold down the Alt or Option key, and you can click on the slider and break it apart. And now what you're doing is you're gradually revealing transparency. To put them back together, you just click, hold, and drag, and they snap right back together. So here's what it looks like. This is before. This is just with the blend mode. If I click, hold, and drag the slider and start to push it over until I start to see a little bit disappear, right around the 50–55% mark, then I hold that Alt or Option key and break that slider. Get a really, really nice composite. I don't want to hurt the legibility. I think I can still read it here, but that's starting to look like that is worn into that material. Fairly believable for a kind of an easy composite. Let me see if I can find an image of smoke real quick. Perfect. Check this out. Flat typography maybe is not wowing anybody with the blend if, but if I was to have something like this would be a very tough mask to deal with. In fact, I don't know if there's a tool that you could do this. Here's where blend if comes in real handy. Make sure this layer is selected. And I just Googled smoke and grabbed the first one I found. Blending options. Now, in this case, I want this layer. I want this layer's darks. So if I grab this black slider, move this over. All right, so yeah, okay, it's some of the black went away, and that's kind of cool, but that's a terrible selection. Like that doesn't look any more believable than anything else. So not quite the best, but if you were to hold that Alt or Option key and break that slider, take a look at how easy some of those dark pixels go away. You're left with something that normally would be very, very difficult to composite. Not that bad. Couple that with a blend mode, maybe like a screen. And that looks like smoke is actually sitting in that environment.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It is really cool. Yeah, and the more that you get comfortable with it, it doesn't happen all the time. There's only a handful of things that really blend if is designed for. This would be one of them. So fire comes up a lot, like little particles, embers and stuff like that. Blend if's the way to go. As long as it's shot on a white or a black background, blend if can really help you out. But yours will look like this. Save it, submit it as a PDF, good to go. The last one is probably easier than this one. So let's take a look at that. It is called Color Effects. This is real simple, folks. What they want you to do is they want you to change the color of the type. Real simple to do. And you'll notice that the type is a shape layer. So I guess it kind of makes sense that we did what we did, even though it took me a while to figure out how to do it. But this text has been converted to a shape. So we can't just double click it and change the font or the color anymore. We've got to put an effect on it. Well, the effect is actually already here. It's color overlay. You can change to whatever color you want. I'm going to do yellow. So on the text layer, I'm going to double click the color overlay. Right now, it's got a black set to it. I'm just going to change it to yellow. And that's a fast way to add color to a shape. Easy, easy. I could add a drop shadow, an outer glow, whatever, whatever. Easy, easy. As far as these legs, this would be a pretty easy selection, assuming that the model was shot on a flat background, be it black or white or gray or blue or whatever. As long as it doesn't conflict with the skin tone or the roller skate color, should be easy to pop off. And that's what they did, probably just a select subject. Put it on a flat background, a lot of color, threw some fun type, had a little wave. This would be type along a path, by the way. Put some color on it. And then they duplicated those legs and they just filled it with a color. Simple as that. And while this looks pretty cool, a blend mode will really start to bring this thing together. So they just duplicated the legs, filled it with a solid color, just like this color overlay. And then on the yellow layer, just change it to overlay. Or multiply. Multiply looks a little bit weird. I think I'm gonna stay with overlay. Turn on the purple layer. Change that to overlay as well. That's kind of how you get that offset retro look. The tutorial calls for you to tone down the opacity to about 60%. I kind of agree with it. It's a bit loud right now. But that's kind of the look that you're going for. Off registration design. It's a pretty popular look right now. So knowing how to do it, it's just a color fill mode with a blend mode on it. Simple as that. But taking something that, it's a decent image, but given what it is and the colors that it's got, I think that this really speaks more to that time period than just a flat illustration or photo. 2 exercises should be really, really simple. Shouldn't take you very long at all. But at least you're getting more familiar with blend modes, now blend if, and kind of reinforcing some of those transformation properties. All right. Let's stop recording.